I think we're just a from the heart rock and roll band, you know?
Van Halen, the band that swapped singers faster than David Lee Roth swapped his shiny spandex. From Roth to Hagar, then Cherone, back to Roth, then Hagar again, and finally Roth one more time. It was pure chaos. They'd always start as a tight crew and end as one, but in between, things got downright ugly. And somewhere in that mess, they even dropped what many call their worst song ever.
You know, since I'm the guitarist, I tend to write a lot of music.
So here's how it went down. Roth bailed to go solo, chasing the spotlight on his own terms. Then came Sammy Hagar in '85, and boom, the band was back on fire. With Hagar leading the charge, Van Halen dropped 4 monster multi-platinum albums that topped the charts. 5150 in '86, OU 812 in '88, For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge in '91, and Balance in '95. All heavy hitters. Fans even started calling them Van Hagar, and they earned that name with 9 #1 rock tracks. But by '96, everything started to crumble. According to Sammy, the trouble began while recording Balance. Their longtime manager, Ed Loeffler, had passed away, a huge loss. His replacement, Ray Daniels, who just happened to be Alex Van Halen's brother-in-law, started stirring the pot. Sammy claimed that Ray whispered in Eddie's ear, saying stuff like Sammy thought he ran the band. Sammy swore he never said that. He said the real issue was that he didn't vibe with Ray at all, and that tension slowly tore the group apart. Then came the breaking point. Ray Daniels pushed everyone to record 2 new songs for the Best of Volume 1 Greatest Hits album. Sammy wasn't feeling it. His wife was pregnant, and both Eddie and Alex were dealing with medical problems. So Sammy thought, perfect time for a break. He took off to Hawaii to spend time with family. But out of nowhere, on Father's Day, Eddie called him and fired him from the band. Sammy insisted he wanted to stay and fix things, but Eddie and Alex claimed he quit outright. No matter who you believe, the end result was the same. One of rock's biggest bands lost their frontman again. To wrap up the new songs for the Greatest Hits album, Van Halen called up the original wild man himself, David Lee Roth. Roth and Eddie started working together again, sorting out which songs to include, and surprisingly, they hit it off. With producer Glenn Ballard, who worked with Alanis Morissette, they cooked up 2 new tracks, Can't Get This Stuff No More and Me Wise Magic. The collaboration was smooth, almost too smooth. Me Wise Magic hit hard, proving Roth still had it. Talks about bringing him back full-time started heating up. But just when things looked good, boom, everything exploded at the 1996 MTV Video Music Awards on September 4th. The band was there to present Best Male Video. Beck won, looked confused, and joked, "What even is Best Male Video?" But Roth took that moment and ran with it. He thought it was the perfect time to tell the world he was officially back with Van Halen and that they were ready to blow the roof off again. Roth claimed it was his idea, his grand vision of how the big comeback would go down. He swore he had the whole thing planned out perfectly in his head. But when they hit that stage, something felt off. Really off. Instead of this epic fist-pumping reunion that fans dreamed of, the vibe was weird and totally out of sync. The energy was off, the timing was messy, and everyone could feel it. Then Roth started doing what Roth does best, rambling. He went off on one of his wild tangents, jumping from thought to thought, and half of it didn't even make sense. The audience looked confused, and even the band members were like, "What is happening right now?" According to Roth, things got heated backstage. He said Eddie Van Halen pulled him aside and snapped, "Tonight's about me, man, not your movie." But Eddie told a whole different story later. At the time, Roth was also working on a film called Crazy from the Heat, and he said he felt totally blindsided, like Eddie had stabbed him in the back right in front of the world. Said he was focused on a new record. but said he was focused on a new record, but definitely not with Dave. Eddie made it clear he'd rather bomb playing his own music than get rich being a jukebox for old hits. That line hit hard, and Roth was furious. Roth called the whole thing a setup, a complete ambush for publicity. He said he never saw it coming and that he felt totally humiliated on live TV. So he went off in the press, blasting the Van Halen brothers for what he saw as betrayal. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, manager Ray Daniels was still running things. The same guy Sammy Hagar couldn't stand. Sammy had already been frustrated long before his firing, and Ray's power moves were a big part of that tension. But Ray had another plan brewing. He was also managing Gary Cherone from the band Extreme, which had just broken up. And guess what? Ray decided Gary would be the perfect new frontman for Van Halen. It was a bold move, bringing in a new singer after all that drama. So after Hagar's exit in '96, Ray pitched Gary Cherone as the next in line. Gary joked that he'd be stepping into the ring against Diamond Dave and the Red Rocker, two absolute legends, but he agreed to meet with the band anyway. And surprisingly, the chemistry was instant. On day one, Eddie and Gary clicked right away, writing songs and vibing like they'd known each other for years. By day two, Eddie told him straight up, "You've got the gig." Eddie even moved Gary into the guest house on his property. That's how much faith he had in him. Gary said working with Eddie felt great, but things were a little trickier with Alex and Michael. Eddie had made the decision fast, maybe too fast, and Gary wasn't totally sure if everyone else was fully on board. Still, the show went on. By 1998, Van Halen was back in the studio with Gary Cherone on vocals, recording Van Halen 3. It was their first album since 1995's Balance. And Eddie co-produced it with Mike Post. Yeah, the guy behind a ton of famous TV themes. Eddie wanted something new, something different, and he pushed hard to make it happen. Eddie took total control on this one, like full-on takeover mode. He even played most of the bass parts himself, only letting Michael Anthony step in on 3 tracks. That right there was the first big sign of what was coming, Michael's slow fade-out from the band. Before long, he'd be replaced by Eddie's son, Wolfgang, on future tours and albums. Eddie wasn't just tweaking the formula, he was reinventing it. He started diving deep into new sounds, experimenting with piano riffs, electric sitar, and all kinds of unexpected textures. It was wild. The late '90s were a weird, creative time in rock anyway. Bands everywhere were breaking rules and going experimental in that post-grunge haze. And Eddie, he was all in. He and Alex were workaholics, living, breathing, and probably dreaming music. And since Eddie owned the studio, they could record whenever inspiration hit, day, night, or 3 a.m. At first, Gary Cherone thought he'd landed the dream gig, singing for Van Halen. Who wouldn't? One of the biggest bands in rock history, and now he's the front man. But that dream started cracking fast. The deeper he got into the band's inner world, the more he realized it wasn't the fantasy he'd pictured. The tension between Gary and Eddie started building, little by little. For one thing, Gary was literally living on Eddie's property. Talk about pressure. At first, they clicked creatively, jamming nonstop and writing like crazy. But then came the constant calls. Eddie would ring Gary at all hours saying, "Hey, I've got a new idea." And it never stopped. Gary couldn't catch a break. Living on your boss's land meant you were basically on call 24/7. Eventually, Gary hit his breaking point and said, "Forget this," and packed up to move out. The result of all that chaos? Van Halen 3, the band's most scattered, uneven record ever. It sounded more like a rough demo than a polished album. If you could listen past the messy production and missed beats, there were some really creative sparks hidden in there, hints of where the band could have gone next. But the production just didn't deliver. It felt like Eddie had trapped the music inside a box, cornered by his own perfectionism. The lead single, Without You, had a solid groove, but it didn't even sound like Van Halen anymore. It sounded more like Extreme. If you'd played it blind to a rock fan in '98, they'd probably think it was an Extreme track. Then came Fire in the Hole, another one that carried that same vibe, cool energy but unfocused. It did make it onto the Lethal Weapon 4 soundtrack, though, which gave it some shine. But overall, a lot of tracks felt like the band was chasing the old Sammy-era sound instead of carving out something new. It was like they were trying to bottle that past success instead of embracing Gary's different style, and it showed. The spark was fading. And then came that song. The one fans still call the worst in Van Halen history, How Many Say I. This was Eddie Van Halen's attempt at singing lead, and well, it crashed hard. The track was this oddball piano ballad that sounded like something born from one of Eddie's late-night bursts of inspiration that maybe should have stayed in the demo folder. Gary's voice pops up for some high harmonies, and it honestly sounds like he might have been dragged out of bed from the guest house just to record them. It was weird, messy, and kind of sad. A glimpse of genius buried under exhaustion and confusion. Van Halen III was proof that even rock gods can lose their balance when the chemistry slips away. Some fans said Van Halen III had a little bit of that Pink Floyd vibe, trippy, moody, and experimental. Others compared it to Brandon by Mötley Crüe. Yeah, that awkward song that made fans cringe with secondhand embarrassment. And honestly, a lot of people felt the same about Van Halen III. When it dropped, critics tore it apart. Fans said it strayed way too far from that classic Van Halen energy, the swagger, the punch, the fun, and commercially, it bombed. It became the only Van Halen studio album that didn't go platinum. Ouch. Before Gary Cherone's exit in '99, though, there was a glimmer of hope. The band had started working with producer Danny Carmar on a follow-up album that was supposed to bring back that straightforward classic Van Halen sound, loud, tight, and catchy. But when Gary left, those new songs got shelved and never saw the light of day. One of them, Left for Dead, later ended up on Gary's new band, Tribe of Judah's debut album, and it ripped. If Van Halen had dropped something like that back then, the whole Cherone era might have earned some redemption. But by that point, the damage was done. After releasing Van Halen III, the band hit the road for the tour. And this time, they even played in countries they'd never been to before, like Australia and New Zealand. Fans were skeptical at first, but once the lights came up, the shows actually rocked. Gary brought a lot of passion and gave new life to songs that hadn't been heard live in ages. See, Gary was all about digging back into the Roth-era classics that Sammy Hagar didn't want to touch. The set list had 19 full songs, 10 from the Roth era, 4 from the Hagar days, and 5 from the new record. On paper, it looked chaotic, but live, it worked surprisingly well. Gary's voice had range. He could hit those high Hagar notes and then drop down to that low Roth growl. The balance was wild, and it made for a killer live mix. And they didn't just stop there. During the shows, Michael Anthony even took lead vocals on Somebody Get Me a Doctor. Fans went nuts for it. That moment hit so well that the song actually stayed in the set list years later when Hagar came back in 2004. For anyone who'd seen Gary perform with Extreme, they already knew this guy was a beast on stage. He never stopped moving, jumping, running, spinning. No stage was ever big enough for him. That energy was pure electricity, and it gave Van Halen's live show a new kind of spark. But here's the sad part. Despite the power on stage, the crowds just weren't there. Ticket sales were rough. Many shows had half-empty venues, and that killed the vibe for everyone involved. The band had the potential, but the timing was off. It was like the world just wasn't ready for this version of Van Halen. As the tour dragged on, Gary started feeling it. The low turnout, the mixed reviews, the pressure, it all stacked up. By 1999, he decided enough was enough. His split with the band was friendly, but you could tell there was a lot of frustration behind it. Then in 2000, Van Halen tried one more time to bring the magic back with David Lee Roth. According to Michael Anthony, they were actually close to finishing a full new album. The vibe was good, for a minute. But just like before, it all fell apart. Another fallout with Roth ended the reunion before it could really begin. And once again, Van Halen was left standing in the ashes of what could have been. After all the chaos, Van Halen went quiet. Like, really quiet. The band slipped into a long hiatus while Eddie's life started spinning out. His drinking was getting worse, his cocaine use was picking up again, and things were getting dark behind the scenes. Then in 2000, everything took a shocking turn. At just 44 years old, Eddie Van Halen was diagnosed with tongue cancer. At first, his team put out a statement saying he didn't actually have cancer, just that he was starting an outpatient clinical trial to prevent it. But the truth was he'd been living hard for decades, smoking and drinking daily like it was second nature. Still, Eddie swore that wasn't the cause. He said the cancer came from him constantly putting metal guitar picks, made of copper and nickels, in his mouth while playing. He truly believed that's what did it. In 2001, Eddie went through a brutal surgery that removed about a third of his tongue. After that, he had to relearn how to talk and sing. It was a rough road, and the toll it took on his health bled right into his marriage with Valerie Bertinelli. Their relationship had already been rocky. Years of drug struggles and infidelity on both sides had eaten away at it. When Eddie got his diagnosis, the two had already been separated for months. Valerie finally hit her breaking point when Eddie refused to stop smoking, even after learning about the cancer. But then in 2002 came some hope. Eddie was declared cancer-free. In a 2004 interview, he boldly said, "I'm not in remission. The cancer is just gone." He sounded unstoppable, saying, "There's nothing that can keep me down." Still, he had to keep getting small cancer cells scraped from his throat every so often, a constant reminder of what he'd survived. He started exploring medical treatments overseas, what some called medical tourism, and crazy enough, it worked. The European treatments helped him buy more time and keep going strong. But man, Eddie's life in those years was wild. And that brings us to one of the strangest rock stories ever told. So picture this. It's 2001, and somehow Eddie Van Halen crosses paths with Fred Durst from Limp Bizkit at a party. A record exec at the gathering pipes up and says, "You two should jam together." Fred thought it'd be hilarious and a total clash of worlds. And Eddie, never one to back down, goes, "Forget it, let's jam." At that time, Limp Bizkit's guitarist Wes Borland had quit, so the band was hunting for a new shredder. Eddie figured he'd check it out for fun, so he heads over to Fred Durst's house, gear in hand, ready to rock. But once they start playing, Eddie realizes this might have been a mistake. He later said he felt like a scholar among kindergartners. Things got awkward fast, and then, the final straw. The rest of Limp Bizkit lit up and started smoking weed mid-session. Eddie wasn't having it. He packed up, walked out, and went home. The problem? He'd left all his expensive gear behind at Fred's place. So the next day, Eddie tried to get it back, calling, texting, reaching out. But Fred Durst completely ghosted him. A full 24 hours went by, and Eddie was fuming. So he decided to handle it his own way. According to the wild story that's been floating around for years, Eddie jumped into his military-style vehicle, grabbed a firearm, and drove straight to Fred Durst's house. He pulled up onto Fred's lawn, engine still running, ready for business. And there he was, hair tied back in a samurai bun, furious and unfiltered, standing outside Fred Durst's place like something straight out of a rock and roll action movie. It was one of those legendary moments that perfectly summed up Eddie's unpredictable spirit. Half genius, half chaos, and all rock and roll. When Eddie rolled up to Fred Durst's place, the man looked wild. He had a rope holding up his jeans, duct-taped combat boots, and that same signature attitude like he was ready for war. According to the story, Eddie stormed right up to the front door and started banging like a madman. When Fred finally opened it, Eddie didn't waste a second. He pointed the weapon straight at him and barked, "Where's my stuff, man?" Fred panicked and yelled for one of his employees to grab all of Eddie's gear. Fast! So there Eddie stood, in the front yard, cigarette dangling from his lips, weapon still in hand, watching as guitars, amps, and pedals were tossed into his military vehicle one by one. The image was insane. Pure rock and roll chaos. Some people have said the story was exaggerated, maybe even made up, but Eddie swore it was true. And honestly, given his wild mindset at that time, it's totally believable. Needless to say, he didn't land the Limp Bizkit gig. By 2004, though, Van Halen made another big move. They reunited with Sammy Hagar for a massive 80-date tour and dropped a new greatest hits album, Best of Both Worlds, featuring 3 brand new tracks. On paper, it looked like a dream comeback, but behind the scenes, it was tense from day one. Michael Anthony was only allowed back into the band under some brutal terms. He had to take a huge pay cut. The tension between him and the Van Halen brothers had been brewing for years. Back in '84, they'd already slashed his royalties, claiming he didn't contribute enough to songwriting. And Eddie, in his usual blunt way, often trashed Michael's bass playing, saying he had to lay down most of the bass parts himself because Michael couldn't hack it. That cut deep, and Michael had every right to be furious. But despite all the disrespect, Michael stayed loyal and stuck with the band. In 2004, though, things got even worse. He was forced to sign away his rights to the Van Halen name and logo and accept yet another pay cut. The truth is, Eddie and Alex didn't even want him on the tour at all. The only reason Michael got the gig was because Sammy Hagar refused to do it without him. Sammy made it clear, no Michael, no tour. That didn't sit well with the Van Halen brothers. During the band's hiatus, Michael had been jamming with Sammy on his solo tours, and that ticked Eddie and Alex off big time. They saw it as betrayal, like Michael had switched sides. This reunion ended up being the last straw, Michael's final tour with Van Halen, and Sammy's too. At first, Hagar tried to keep things positive. He agreed to the reunion, helped record the 3 new tracks for Best of Both Worlds, and hit the road with high hopes. But it didn't take long before the old problems started creeping back in. Sammy later admitted that he regretted the whole thing, saying they should have just made a brand new album instead of recycling hits. The tension got heavier every night. Eddie's drinking had completely taken over again, and his performances started slipping badly. What was supposed to be a triumphant comeback quickly turned into one of the ugliest tours in rock history. Sammy said it was some of the most miserable, backstabbing, dark crap he'd ever dealt with in his entire life. The Van Halen brothers got annoyed with Sammy for promoting his Cabo Wabo tequila at shows, something that drove Eddie absolutely crazy. The tension between the two sides got so bad that Sammy and Michael eventually started traveling and handling security separately from Eddie and Alex. The band was technically on tour together, but emotionally, they were worlds apart. By the end of that run, Sammy knew there was no fixing it. His bond with Eddie, once strong, creative, and full of fire, was broken beyond repair. The magic that had made Van Hagar so unstoppable in the '80s was gone, and all that was left were burned bridges, bad memories, and one of the most toxic rock reunions ever. Michael Anthony didn't even get a phone call. He found out he was fired through online reports. That's how he learned Eddie had replaced him with his own son, Wolfgang Van Halen. It was a brutal blow, and that cold, behind-the-scenes move completely shattered whatever was left of Michael's bond with the Van Halen brothers. Over time, Sammy Hagar and Alex Van Halen slowly managed to patch things up, at least a little. They even talked about maybe doing something together again on stage someday. But that full reunion, it never actually happened. The wounds were deep, and Van Halen went quiet once again. Then in 2007, everything changed. After years of silence, the band finally got back together, this time with David Lee Roth back at the mic. Early that year, Van Halen's management confirmed the reunion and announced a massive North American tour with Roth leading the charge. But one name was missing from the lineup, Michael Anthony. He was officially out, and Wolfgang was officially in. A lot of fans were furious. Replacing one of the original members, especially Michael, whose high harmonies and stage energy had been a key part of the Van Halen sound, didn't sit right with longtime followers. Still, despite the controversy, the 2007 tour turned into a huge success. Every show was packed. They sold out arenas all across North America, proving that Van Halen still had that legendary fire. Roth was his usual wild self, unpredictable, funny, and totally over the top. The crowd couldn't get enough of it. They tore through the classics from the Roth era, Jump, Panama, Ain't Talkin' About Love, and fans went crazy. It was like stepping right back into 1984 again. The chemistry between Roth and the Van Halen brothers lit up the stage, and surprisingly, it was Wolfgang who had made it all happen. Back in 2006, Wolfgang had been the one to encourage his dad and uncle to bring Roth back into the fold. He even reached out to Roth's manager himself, getting the talks started and helping rebuild the bridge that had been burned for so long. The kid wasn't just playing bass. He was pulling the strings behind the reunion, too. That same year, Eddie's personal life took another big turn. In 2007, he and Valerie Bertinelli finalized their divorce after decades of ups and downs. But unlike before, this time they stayed on good terms. They still shared love and respect for each other, especially for their son, Wolfgang. Then, in 2009, Eddie married Janie Lisewski, an actress and stuntwoman known for roles in From Dusk Till Dawn, Mulholland Drive, and Bubba Hotep. Eddie had originally hired Janie as his publicist back in 2006, and their connection quickly deepened into something real. She stayed by his side through everything, personally and professionally. Janie even ran her own company, High Profile Media, representing Eddie and the band. The two stayed married until Eddie's passing in 2020. Fast forward to 2012. Van Halen was back in the studio and ready to make history one last time. Their 12th and final album, A Different Kind of Truth, dropped on February 7th, 2012. It was their first full-length album with Roth since 1984. Eddie was hesitant at first. He still had scars from the Van Halen 3 disaster and the rough 2004 reunion tracks. But eventually, he gave in, and the band went digging through their vaults for lost gems and forgotten riffs. The first single, Tattoo, came from an old 1977 to 79 live tune called Down in Flames, with new verses and a modern twist. They also revived tracks from their early demo sessions with Gene Simmons, songs like She's the Woman, Out of Space, Big River, originally called Big Trouble, and Beats Workin'. Reworking old songs wasn't new territory for Van Halen. Eddie had always been a master at taking an old lick and turning it into something brand new. In fact, the original breakdown for She's the Woman ended up becoming the famous breakdown in Mean Street. So when they re-recorded She's the Woman for A Different Kind of Truth, they had to come up with a fresh new breakdown before Eddie unleashed another blazing solo. It was classic Van Halen, old riffs reborn with new fire, and a reminder that even after decades of chaos, lineup changes, and personal battles, the band could still hit like thunder when they locked in together. A lot of the songs on A Different Kind of Truth came from pure jam sessions, just the band hanging out in the studio, riffing and catching lightning in a bottle. They bounced between producers at first, trying out big names like Rick Rubin and Pat Leonard, but neither of them clicked with the band's vision. Eventually, they brought in John Shanks, David Lee Roth's pick, to take over production, and that's when things finally started flowing. They split the recording between two legendary spots: Eddie's personal 5150 Studios and Henson Recording Studios in Hollywood. The result? A raw, heavy, and more aggressive record than anything they'd done in decades. The songs were tighter too, short, punchy, and to the point, often under 4 minutes, just like the early Van Halen glory days. They even tuned down the instruments to match Roth's lower vocal range. His voice wasn't as wild as in the 80s, but he made up for it with swagger and style. The revamped She's the Woman came out fierce, proving Van Halen could still crush riffs and deliver full-blown rock energy like they were 20 years younger. Their lead single, Tattoo, was pure nostalgia with a twist. It carried those classic Van Halen licks but added a slick, modern melody in the pre-chorus. And when Roth dropped into those trademark 70s-style harmonies, it hit that perfect mix of old-school soul and new-school groove. Eddie's solo? Vintage fire, lightning fast and dripping with feel. Then there's Stay Frosty, the track that threw fans back to the Ice Cream Man days. Roth started it off with a cool acoustic intro before the whole band exploded into one of the most fun, bluesy jams they'd done in years. Eddie shredded through it like he was on a mission, ripping solos that felt straight from another planet. It was pure Van Halen magic, playful, powerful, and full of bite. But when things got heavy, they really got heavy. The Trouble with Never had one of the meanest, tightest riffs in the band's entire catalog. Eddie used a wah pedal and went absolutely berserk on the solo. Total chaos in the best way possible. Alex Van Halen, meanwhile, was on fire throughout the record. His drumming hit with massive power and this incredible room-filling ambiance, like thunder wrapped in rhythm. Roth brought his lower register to the forefront, using that deep, swaggering tone to his advantage. Sure, he didn't have the high-end range from the early years, but he made up for it with personality and precision. His voice still had punch, and it blended perfectly with the heavy grooves Eddie and Alex were laying down. Still, a lot of longtime fans brushed the album off, mainly because Michael Anthony wasn't part of it. And yeah, you could feel his absence. Those rich, high harmonies that had defined the Van Halen sound for decades just weren't the same. Michael's melodic bass lines had their own funky swagger that no one could fully duplicate. But to be fair, Wolfgang did an amazing job stepping in. His bass tone was gritty and bold, locking in tight with Alex's relentless drum attack. He played with hunger. You could tell he wasn't trying to replace Michael, but to carve his own space in the Van Halen legacy. For fans who were willing to listen with an open mind, A Different Kind of Truth turned out to be a beast of an album, raw, energetic, and a perfect blend of the band's past and present. It wasn't just a comeback record. It was proof that Van Halen still had that electric spark, even after all the chaos, heartbreak, and decades of madness. Van Halen truly went out with a bang. Their final era behind A Different Kind of Truth was everything fans could have hoped for. Loud, electric, and full of that classic fire that made them legends. The tour was their first in 4 years, and fans were hungry to see this lineup back together again. When they kicked things off in Louisville, Kentucky on February 18, 2012, the place was packed, a total sellout. What followed was a blistering 2-hour set that ripped through both their old-school classics and fresh cuts from the new album. The set list was a dream: Eruption, Runnin' with the Devil, Ain't Talkin' About Love, Panama, Jump, all the favorites that defined generations. And right alongside them came the new tunes like Tattoo and She's the Woman. The energy was through the roof. Fans were singing every word, and Eddie was tearing through solos like time had never passed. The tour was a massive success, pulling in around $55 million and bringing in roughly 500,000 fans across 46 shows. It was living proof that Van Halen could still dominate the stage decades into their career. But of course, no Van Halen chapter ever came without a little drama. They had planned a second North American leg, but it got scrapped. Eddie later admitted they had bitten off more than they could chew, especially since they had rushed the start of the tour to fit in a special Madison Square Garden date. Then came another milestone. On March 31st, 2015, the band dropped Tokyo Dome live in concert. It was their very first live album with David Lee Roth on vocals, and only their second live record ever, following 1993's Live Right Here, Right Now from the Sammy Hagar era. The performance was recorded during the A Different Kind of Truth tour and captured a full wild night in Tokyo that showed off every side of the band. Originally, Van Halen had planned something totally different. They wanted to remix and release 25 old demos from their pre-fame days before they ever signed with a major label. But when they went looking, the original tapes were nowhere to be found. So Roth got the call to pick a live show instead, and he chose the Tokyo Dome concert. The end result? A raw, unpolished, no-nonsense snapshot of Van Halen doing what they did best, bringing chaos and magic to the stage. Fans had mixed feelings about the album, but most appreciated how real it sounded. It wasn't polished, it wasn't auto-tuned, and it wasn't fixed up in the studio. It was pure, warts and all Van Halen. The energy, the spontaneity, the wildness. It was all there. Sammy Hagar, though, didn't hold back his opinion. He slammed the release, saying, "They've got some pretty rough vocals. I'm just going, what are these guys thinking?" But plenty of others completely disagreed, saying that was exactly what made it special. That raw, unfiltered vibe that only Van Halen could deliver live. Riding off that release, the band hit the road again for what would unknowingly become their final tour ever. The 41-date North American run kicked off on July 5th, 2015 in Auburn, Washington, and wrapped up on October 4th in Los Angeles, the city where it all began. The set list was stacked with fan favorites: Hot for Teacher, Panama, Jump, Runnin' with the Devil, the ultimate soundtrack to rock rebellion. Blues rock guitarist Kenny Wayne Shepherd opened each night, setting the tone for what always turned into an unforgettable show. Despite Eddie's ongoing health struggles, he still shredded like the guitar god he was. Every solo felt like lightning striking for the last time. Commercially, the tour crushed it, pulling in over $26 million and packing crowds in 39 cities across the U.S. and Canada. The fans came out in full force, generation after generation, all there to see the legends one last time. What no one knew, though, was that this would be their final chance to witness Van Halen live. That 2015 run ended up being not just a tour, but a farewell victory lap for one of the greatest rock bands to ever walk the earth. It was the last roar of Eddie's guitar, the final scream of Roth's voice, and the closing chapter in a story that defined decades of rock and roll history. After the curtain closed on the 2015 tour, Van Halen quietly faded from the spotlight. The band became mostly inactive, and Eddie's health began to take a serious downturn. Still, even in the middle of his battle, Eddie's mind stayed creative. He started dreaming about one final all-inclusive kitchen sink tour. His vision? To bring everyone who had ever been part of the Van Halen legacy back together on one stage. The brothers, Michael Anthony, Wolfgang, David Lee Roth, Sammy Hagar, and even Gary Cherone. Imagine that lineup. It would have been a once-in-a-lifetime tour, a true celebration of every Van Halen era. But heartbreakingly, it never came to be. When Eddie was diagnosed again, he quickly realized that the most promising treatments weren't available in the U.S. So he began flying to Europe regularly, seeking specialized care that was considered experimental, and even illegal in America. Doctors gave him only a few months to live in 2017, but those overseas treatments helped buy him precious time. Eddie fought hard and stayed strong for as long as he could, but the disease eventually caught up to him. On October 6, 2020, Eddie Van Halen passed away at a hospital in Santa Monica, California. He was surrounded by his ex-wife, Valerie Bertinelli, and his son, Wolfgang, the two people who'd been with him through every storm. In the months before his passing, Eddie had managed to reconnect with Sammy Hagar, the two trading friendly texts after years of silence. It was a small but powerful moment of peace between old friends who had once created magic together. When the news of Eddie's death broke, the entire music world froze. It felt like the air had been sucked out of rock and roll. Fans and musicians everywhere were blindsided. The Van Halen family had kept his condition private for years, so many didn't realize just how serious things had become. In a year already filled with loss and chaos, losing Eddie felt like an extra punch to the gut. Eddie Van Halen's passing wasn't just the loss of a guitarist, it was the loss of a revolutionary. He had completely changed what it meant to play electric guitar. He was an innovator, an inventor, and a performer who never stopped chasing new sounds. His creativity came at the perfect moment, when rock needed a hero to save it from the bland, glittery monotony of disco. Eddie came crashing in with a smile, a cigarette, and a guitar that sounded like it was built by aliens, and he reignited the fire of hard rock around the world. He wasn't just about showing off either. Every wild solo, every crazy tap, every dive bomb, it all served the song. Eddie wasn't self-indulgent, he was purposeful. His music was powerful, fun, and full of joy, the kind that made you grin while your ears melted. He helped create one of the greatest, most entertaining rock bands in history, and even through all the drama, fights, and chaos, his legacy stands untouchable. But as with anything involving Van Halen, the drama didn't stay quiet for long. In the years following Eddie's death, new tensions started brewing, this time between David Lee Roth and Wolfgang Van Halen. Roth started posting strange, rant-filled videos online, taking verbal jabs at Wolfgang and calling him names. In one of the wildest clips, Roth referred to him as "this kid," mocking him with the Yiddish insult Schlemiel, meaning someone who clumsily spills drinks all over themselves. The whole thing came off bitter, like Roth was still holding resentment over Wolfgang replacing Michael Anthony in the band. He even threw in a few digs about nepotism, hinting that Wolfgang only got the spot because he was Eddie's son. Roth didn't stop there, though. He claimed that during the band's final tour in 2015, Wolfgang was constantly complaining that Roth wasn't paying attention to him on stage. He painted the young bassist as moody and vindictive, saying that at one New York City concert, Wolfgang kicked some of Roth's invited guests out from backstage. To hand out checks. Roth dropped all this to hand out checks. Roth dropped all this tea during a bizarre spoof interview with Jesus Christ, of all things, adding another layer of strange to an already wild story. Roth didn't hold back. He got straight up sarcastic and took aim at Wolfgang, saying he didn't earn his spot in Van Halen through skill, but purely because of family ties. He kept repeating it mockingly. His kid. His kid. Like he couldn't let it go. It was classic Roth, dramatic, cutting, and full of that over-the-top ego that made him both entertaining and infuriating. But Wolfgang, he took the high road. In his interview with Rolling Stone, he kept things calm, saying that he and Roth were on cordial terms, not close, not enemies, just civil. He also revealed that it was largely Roth's difficult personality that kept the long-rumored Eddie Van Halen tribute concert from ever happening. That hit fans hard. Many had been hoping for one last massive celebration of Eddie's life and music. Some fans speculated that Roth's bitterness toward Wolfgang also had to do with the poor commercial performance of A Different Kind of Truth. The album didn't hit the numbers the band had hoped for, and Roth seemed to quietly blame Wolfgang for that, especially after the record's low streaming stats years later. But regardless of all the tension, it's undeniable. Dave is Dave. He was the perfect frontman for Van Halen's wild, rebellious sound, even if he and Eddie didn't always get along. Their chemistry was unpredictable, sometimes fiery, sometimes magical. But that clash is exactly what gave the band its spark. When Dave was around, Eddie always seemed more alive, more creative, almost like Roth's chaos pulled something electric out of him. Sure, Eddie was more chill and productive during the Sammy years, but with Dave, he was on fire. That rivalry pushed him to new heights, and it gave us some of the most legendary rock moments ever recorded. When Eddie died, Van Halen died with him. There's just no other way to say it. But what they left behind, it's pure gold. A treasure chest of riffs, solos, and memories that defined rock and roll for generations. And that wraps up this wild ride through the life, music, and madness of Eddie Van Halen. From the early days of backyard gigs to global superstardom, to the personal battles and legendary comebacks. What a journey it's been. For those of us lucky enough to grow up with his sound, we got to witness something truly special. The magic of a once-in-a-lifetime artist who changed everything every time he plugged in his guitar. If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button. Don't forget to hit that like button too. It helps reach even more rock fans who love these stories as much as we do. Drop your thoughts down below. Tell me your favorite Van Halen moment, song, or memory. I love reading your takes and hearing which era of the band hit you hardest. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Rock on forever, and keep Eddie's legacy alive.
It's basically like wake up, you know? If there's something you want to do it right now. Don't wait till tomorrow.